Have you ever caught yourself in a moment of quiet reflection, feeling like you're being watched? Not by someone else, but by another version of yourself. Perhaps it's the version of you that you're most afraid of becoming, the one who gave up on their dreams, who settled for less, who never faced their fears, or who lost their way. What if I told you that this version of you, the one that haunts your quiet moments, is already here, watching your every move? Before you click away thinking this is some horror story, stay with me. Because understanding this shadow presence could be the key to unlocking the most authentic, powerful version of yourself. In today's video, we're going to explore why acknowledging this watching presence isn't something to fear but to embrace. We'll dive into the psychology behind it, the spiritual implications, and most importantly, how this awareness can transform your life in ways you never imagined. This isn't just theory. I've walked this path myself, and I've seen countless others transform their lives once they understood this principle. So if you've been feeling stuck, if you've been sensing that something in your life needs to change but you don't know what, this video is especially for you. Let's begin this journey together, shall we? Before we dive deeper, I want to clarify what I mean by the version of you that you're afraid to become. For some of us, it's the person who never pursued their passion. For others, it's the one who became cynical, bitter, or lost their sense of wonder. Maybe it's the version who remained trapped in toxic patterns, who never healed their wounds, or who became exactly what they swore they'd never be. We all have these shadows, these potential futures we fear. And in Jungian psychology, these aspects form part of what Carl Jung called our shadow self, the parts of ourselves we reject, deny, or fear. But here's where it gets interesting. Jung believed that the shadow doesn't disappear when we ignore it. Instead, it grows stronger in the darkness of our unconscious, influencing our decisions, triggering our fears, and sometimes sabotaging our growth. From a spiritual perspective, we could say that time isn't as linear as we experience it. The future versions of ourselves already exist in potential, watching us make the choices that will either bring them into being or fade them away. And from the lens of consciousness and quantum reality, some traditions suggest that all possible versions of ourselves exist simultaneously in different realities or timelines. The choices we make determine which timeline becomes our lived experience. Now, I understand if this sounds a bit abstract right now. But stick with me, because I promise to make this practical and applicable to your everyday life. Because whether you view this through a psychological, spiritual, or quantum lens, the implications are profound and potentially life-changing. Here's what we'll explore today. First, we'll identify the versions of ourselves we fear becoming and understand why they hold such power over us. Then, we'll learn how to engage with these shadow aspects rather than running from them. Next, we'll discover how this engagement can lead to profound inner peace and harmony. And finally, we'll develop practical strategies to harness this understanding for personal transformation. Are you ready? Let's continue our journey. Let's start by identifying these versions of ourselves that we fear becoming. This requires radical honesty, so I invite you to pause the video at any point if you need more time to reflect. Think about the moments when you feel most disappointed in yourself. What version of you shows up in those moments? Is it the version who's quick to anger? The one who procrastinates important tasks? The one who sabotages relationships when they get too close? Or perhaps your feared self exists on a longer timeline. Maybe it's the you who's still stuck in the same unfulfilling job 10 years from now. The you who never wrote that book, started that business, or healed that relationship. The you who grew old with regrets rather than memories. These feared versions of ourselves often stem from three primary sources. First, they might be reflections of patterns we've witnessed in others, perhaps a parent who never pursued their dreams, a friend who became bitter after disappointment, or a colleague who compromised their values for success. Second, they could be born from our past mistakes, moments when we glimpsed a version of ourselves we didn't like and vowed never again, yet fear we might return to. Third, they often embody our deepest insecurities, the qualities we most fear possessing or the failures we most dread experiencing. From a Jungian perspective, these feared selves are aspects of our shadow, parts of our psyche that we've rejected or denied. Jung believed that the shadow contains not only our darkest impulses but also unlived potential and undeveloped gifts. Let me share a personal example. For years, I feared becoming someone who was financially successful but spiritually empty, someone who achieved external validation but lost their authentic voice and purpose along the way. This fear was so strong that I unconsciously sabotaged opportunities that might have led to greater success, because success itself had become entangled with this feared version of myself. It wasn't until I recognized this pattern, this watching presence of my feared self, that I could separate the genuine desire for meaningful work from the fear of spiritual emptiness. Once I acknowledged this fear, I could consciously choose a path that honored both material well-being and spiritual fulfillment. Now, let's make this personal for you. I want you to take a moment to identify one version of yourself that you're afraid of becoming. Be specific. What does this version look like? How do they behave? What choices have they made or failed to make? What consequences are they living with? Got that image in mind? Good. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and perhaps a bit uncomfortable. This version of you already exists within your psyche. They're watching you right now, observing your choices, your hesitations, your moments of courage and moments of compromise. But rather than being an ominous presence, this watching self serves an important purpose. They're a guide, a warning system alerting you to potential paths that don't align with your highest truth. In this way, the version of you that you fear can become one of your greatest teachers. From a spiritual perspective, we could say that your soul has already experienced all possible versions of your life. The wisdom from these experiences reaches back through time to guide you, if only you're willing to listen. In quantum terms, the observer effect suggests that the mere act of observing changes what's being observed. When you consciously acknowledge these feared versions of yourself, you're already changing your relationship to them and altering your possible futures. But identification is just the first step. The real transformation begins when we learn to engage with these feared selves rather than running from them. And that's what we'll explore next. Now that we've identified our feared selves, it's time to engage with them. This is where many spiritual and psychological traditions converge. They all recognize that what we resist tends to persist, while what we embrace can transform. So how do we engage with these aspects of ourselves that we've been avoiding? The first step is to recognize that avoidance itself is what gives these feared versions power over us. When we run from what we fear becoming, we often run straight into its arms. It's the psychological principle of ironic processing. Tell yourself not to think of a pink elephant, and suddenly pink elephants are all you can think about. Instead, try this approach. The next time you feel that watching presence, that fear of becoming what you dread, take a moment to mentally turn around and face it. Imagine sitting down with this feared version of yourself and asking them 3 simple questions. What are you trying to protect me from? What wisdom do you have to share with me? What do you need from me right now? This practice draws from both Jungian active imagination and spiritual traditions that encourage dialogue with different aspects of consciousness. It might feel strange at first, but the insights can be profound. When I first did this exercise with my feared, spiritually empty success self, I was surprised to discover that this aspect was actually trying to protect me from losing my authenticity. It wasn't success itself that was threatening, it was the fear of compromising my values along the way. In the law of attraction framework, we understand that what we focus on expands in our experience. When we're fixated on avoiding a feared outcome, we're still focusing energy on that outcome. Instead, this dialogue approach allows us to extract the wisdom from our fears and redirect our energy toward what we truly want to create. Remember, these feared versions of ourselves aren't villains, they're wounded aspects of our psyche trying to protect us in misguided ways. Or from a spiritual perspective, they're aspects of our consciousness that have become fragmented and need reintegration. Let me share a powerful practice for engaging with these feared selves, the shadow integration meditation. Find a quiet space where you won't be disturbed. Close your eyes and take several deep breaths to center yourself. Then, imagine a door in front of you. Behind this door waits the version of yourself that you fear becoming. As you open the door and see this version of yourself, notice your immediate reactions without judgment. Then, invite this aspect of yourself to sit with you. Listen to what they have to say. What paths led them to this point? What pain are they carrying? What wisdom have they gained from their experience? After listening fully, imagine embracing this aspect of yourself with compassion. As you do, notice any transformation that occurs. Often, these feared selves begin to change form when they're finally acknowledged and heard. This practice isn't about indulging negative potential or resigning yourself to becoming what you fear. It's about reclaiming the energy that's been locked in resistance and avoidance. It's about transforming fear into wisdom. From a consciousness perspective, we might say that all aspects of ourselves, past, present, future, light, and shadow, exist within the field of our awareness. When we consciously engage with these aspects rather than pushing them away, we expand our awareness and access greater choice. The version of you that you fear isn't your enemy, it's a messenger carrying important information about your values, your wounds, and your unlived potential. When you engage with this messenger, the message can finally be delivered, and the messenger can transform. And this brings us to the next crucial understanding, how this engagement leads to profound inner peace and harmony. Let's explore that now. Main content, Part 3, Finding Inner Peace Through Integration. There's a peculiar paradox in our journey toward inner peace. It often requires us to make peace with the very aspects of ourselves that seem to threaten our peace. The parts we judge as unpeaceful, our fears, our shadows, our potential for failure or pain, are precisely what we need to embrace to find true serenity. Inner peace isn't the absence of inner conflict, it's the integration of all aspects of ourselves into a harmonious whole. And this integration begins when we stop running from what we fear becoming and instead engage with it consciously. When we acknowledge the watching presence of our feared selves, something remarkable happens. The energy we once spent on avoidance becomes available for creation. The vigilance required to constantly monitor ourselves for signs of becoming what we fear is exhausting. When we release this vigilance through acceptance, we free up tremendous creative energy. This is where the spiritual concept of impermanence becomes profoundly helpful. All versions of ourselves, those we love and those we fear, are temporary manifestations in the river of consciousness. When we truly understand this impermanence, we can hold both our aspirations and our fears more lightly. Consider the traditional Buddhist practice of contemplating impermanence, not as a way to invoke nihilism or despair, but as a path to freedom. When we recognize that all states of being are transient, we can stop grasping so tightly at certain identities and rejecting others so forcefully. The version of you that you currently admire will change. The version of you that you currently fear will change. Both are impermanent waves in the ocean of your being. This understanding doesn't lead to apathy, quite the opposite. It leads to engaged presence with whatever is arising in this moment. From a psychological perspective, Jung spoke about individuation, the process of integrating the various aspects of the psyche into a cohesive whole. He believed that true psychological health wasn't about eliminating our shadow aspects but about bringing them into conscious relationship with our ego. When we do this inner work, we discover that the peace we've been seeking externally was available within us all along, not through rejection of parts of ourselves, but through their loving integration. Let me share a powerful reflection that illustrates this principle. Imagine yourself as a vast sky. Within this sky, many weather patterns arise: sunshine, clouds, gentle rain, and sometimes violent storms. The feared version of yourself might be like a thunderstorm brewing on the horizon. Most of us see the approaching storm and immediately try to change the weather, an impossible task that leaves us frustrated and exhausted. But what if, instead, you recognize that you are not the weather but the sky that holds it all? The storm isn't a threat to your essential nature, it's a temporary pattern moving through your awareness. This shift in identification, from the weather to the sky, is at the heart of many spiritual traditions. It's the recognition that your essential nature is spacious enough to hold all expressions of yourself, including those you fear. When you rest in this spacious awareness, inner peace naturally arises. Not because the storms never come, but because you no longer identify exclusively with the weather. You found harmony with the natural rhythm of change within yourself. In terms of the law of attraction, this integration creates a powerful shift in your vibrational frequency. Instead of emitting the frequency of fear and resistance, you begin emanating acceptance and wholeness. This fundamentally changes what you attract into your experience. Many of us unconsciously manifest circumstances that confirm our fears because our fears are where our energy is focused. When we integrate these feared aspects, we redirect our energy toward conscious creation rather than unconscious avoidance. The harmony we discover through this process isn't static, it's dynamic. It's not about reaching a perfect state where no challenges arise. It's about developing the capacity to dance with whatever arises with grace and awareness. And that brings us to the practical strategies for harnessing this understanding in everyday life, the tools for transformation that can help you integrate these insights into your lived experience. Now let's translate these profound insights into practical actions you can take in your daily life. Because understanding is powerful, but application is where transformation happens. Here are 5 strategies to help you work with the watching presence of your feared self. First, the morning mirror practice. Each morning, take a moment to stand before a mirror and acknowledge both the version of yourself you aspire to become and the version you fear becoming. Say to both, I see you. I honor the wisdom you carry. Today, I choose consciously. This simple ritual brings awareness to the choice point you stand in each day. Second, the journaling dialogue. Set aside 15 minutes to write a conversation between your current self and your feared self. Begin with a simple question like, what are you trying to tell me? Then allow the response to flow without censorship. Continue the dialogue until you feel a sense of resolution or insight. This practice helps externalize internal conflicts and often reveals surprising wisdom. Third, the alternative timeline meditation. This is a powerful visualization where you consciously explore the timeline where you become what you fear. Enter this meditation with curiosity rather than judgment. Often, when we follow these feared timelines to their conclusion, we discover that even in these worst-case scenarios, there are gifts, growth, and unexpected redemptions. Fourth, the value extraction exercise. Ask yourself, what values are revealed by my fear of becoming this version of myself? For example, if you fear becoming financially unstable, this reveals you value security. If you fear becoming isolated, this reveals you value connection. Once you've identified these values, you can consciously honor them in healthier ways rather than being unconsciously driven by the fear. Fifth, the integration ritual. Create a personal ritual that symbolizes making peace with your feared self. This might involve writing a letter to this aspect of yourself and then burning it to symbolize transformation. It might involve creating art that represents integration. Or it might be as simple as a meditation where you visualize embracing this feared version with compassion. Beyond these specific practices, there's a fundamental shift in orientation that can transform your relationship with these feared selves. Instead of asking, how can I avoid becoming what I fear, ask, how can I grow so fully into my authentic self that what I once feared becomes irrelevant? This subtle shift moves your energy from avoidance to creation, from resistance to expression. It acknowledges that the most powerful way to prevent becoming what you fear is not through vigilant prevention but through passionate pursuit of what genuinely calls to your soul. From a spiritual perspective, we might say that your soul already knows the path of your highest expression. The feared versions of yourself are simply signposts highlighting where you've wandered from that path or where old wounds need healing attention. In the framework of consciousness exploration, we understand that awareness itself is transformative. The simple act of bringing conscious attention to these feared aspects begins their integration and transformation. And in terms of the law of attraction, remember that you become what you identify with most strongly. When you identify with the watching presence of fear, you magnetize those experiences. When you identify with your essential nature, the awareness that holds all expressions of yourself, you attract experiences that reflect this wholeness. The beauty of these practices is that they don't require you to have everything figured out. You don't need to know exactly who you're meant to become or exactly how to resolve every fear. You simply need to show up with presence and compassion for all aspects of yourself, including those you've been running from. In this presence, transformation happens naturally. The feared self watching you gradually transforms from an ominous presence into a wise companion on your journey. And this brings us to perhaps the most radical understanding of all, one that completely reframes our relationship with these feared selves. Let's deepen our exploration with a perspective that might fundamentally change how you view the version of yourself that you fear becoming. What if this feared self isn't actually watching you with judgment or malice? What if they're watching with compassion, waiting for you to recognize them as a wounded aspect of yourself that needs your love? In many spiritual traditions, there's a concept that what we perceive as threatening often turns out to be a guide or guardian when approached with courage. Think of the fearsome deities in Tibetan Buddhism who, when faced directly, reveal themselves to be protectors. Or consider the monsters in dreams that, when confronted, often transform into allies. The version of you that you fear becoming may be playing a similar role in your psyche. Rather than being a threat, they may be a guardian of threshold, challenging you to grow beyond your current limitations and heal your deepest wounds. This perspective invites a profound shift, from seeing your feared self as a warning of what you might become if you fail, to recognizing them as a catalyst for becoming who you truly are. In Jungian terms, this is the alchemical transformation of the shadow. When we bring conscious awareness to these disowned aspects of ourselves, their energy becomes available for our growth and creativity rather than manifesting as sabotage or fear. Consider the possibility that these feared versions of ourselves are not potential futures to be avoided but aspects of our wholeness-seeking integration. They represent capacities, vulnerabilities, and experiences that belong in the fullness of who we are. The parts of ourselves that we judge most harshly often contain our greatest gifts in distorted form. The fear of becoming a failure might contain the gift of vulnerability and authenticity. The fear of becoming selfish might contain the gift of healthy boundaries and self-respect. The fear of becoming insignificant might contain the gift of humility and interconnection. Let me share a personal revelation that transformed my understanding of this principle. For years, I feared becoming someone who was disconnected from their creative inspiration, dried up, creative who had lost their authentic voice. This fear was so strong that it sometimes paralyzed me creatively. One day, during a deep meditation, I had a vision of this feared version of myself. But instead of appearing as I had imagined, bitter, empty, uninspired, they appeared as a guardian holding the question, are you creating from authentic inspiration or from ego and expectation? This feared self wasn't a warning of inevitable creative death but a guardian of creative integrity. This experience completely shifted my relationship with creative blocks. I began to see them not as signs that I was becoming my feared self but as invitations to return to authentic creation. The fear transformed from an ominous warning to a valuable compass. From a consciousness perspective, we might understand this as the recognition that all aspects of ourselves, even those we fear, are ultimately expressions of the same consciousness. They aren't foreign invaders but parts of our wholeness that have been exiled through judgment and fear. In terms of the law of attraction, this shift is powerful because it transforms what we're broadcasting to the universe. Instead of emitting the frequency of, I'm afraid of becoming this, we emit the frequency of, I'm integrating all aspects of myself into wholeness. This fundamentally changes what we attract into our experience. This deeper understanding invites a radical acceptance, not of resignation to becoming what we fear, but of the presence of these aspects within our psyche right now. It's the recognition that the full spectrum of human experience lives within us, and our work is not to eliminate parts of this spectrum but to bring consciousness to how we express it. When we understand this, the watching presence of our feared self becomes less ominous and more sacred, a witness to our journey of integration who holds important wisdom for our growth. As we approach the conclusion of our exploration, let's consider the ultimate transformation that becomes possible when we fully integrate this understanding. The version of you that you fear becoming is watching you, not to ensure that you become them, but to ensure that you recognize the choice point you stand in at every moment. They're a reminder of your power to choose, to heal, and to create consciously. When you fully embrace this understanding, something remarkable happens. The boundary between the self you aspire to be and the self you fear becoming begins to dissolve. You recognize that both are constructs of your mind, useful for navigation but not ultimate truths about your nature. What emerges is a more expansive sense of self, one that isn't defined by either aspirations or fears but by presence with whatever is arising in this moment. This is what many spiritual traditions point to as our essential nature, the awareness that holds all experiences without being limited by any of them. In this awareness, you're no longer driven by the need to become something or avoid becoming something else. You're free to respond to life with freshness and authenticity rather than from patterns of striving or avoidance. This doesn't mean you no longer have goals or values. In fact, your actions may outwardly look similar. But inwardly, there's a radical shift. You're no longer acting from fear of becoming what you dread or attachment to becoming what you desire. You're acting from alignment with the intelligence of life moving through you in this moment. From a Jungian perspective, this represents the integration of opposites, the transcendent function that emerges when we hold seemingly contradictory aspects of ourselves in conscious awareness. It's the recognition that we are neither our light nor our shadow exclusively, but the awareness that holds both. In terms of the law of attraction, this integration creates a powerful coherence in your energetic field. Instead of fragmented energies pulling in different directions, part of you reaching for what you desire, part of you resisting what you fear, there's a unified field of conscious creation. Imagine how differently you might live if you weren't constantly looking over your shoulder for the version of you that you fear becoming. Imagine the energy that would be liberated if you weren't splitting your attention between creation and avoidance. This liberated energy becomes available for presence, for joy, for authentic connection, and for meaningful contribution. You become more fully available to your life as it's unfolding now rather than caught in projections about potential futures. This doesn't mean you'll never again feel fear about who you might become. These fears may still arise, especially in times of challenge or transition. But your relationship with them will be fundamentally different. Instead of being consumed by them, you'll recognize them as messengers carrying information about what matters most to you. From a spiritual perspective, this integration represents a kind of awakening, not to some transcendent realm separate from human experience, but to the sacredness of all aspects of your humanity. It's the recognition that even your fears and shadows are expressions of the same consciousness that gives rise to your aspirations and gifts. And in terms of impermanence, this understanding brings a profound peace with the ever-changing nature of who you are. You recognize that all versions of yourself, past, present, and potential futures, arise and pass away in the vast ocean of consciousness. None is permanent, and none defines the totality of who you are. This understanding doesn't eliminate the human experience of fear or desire. But it does transform your relationship with these experiences. They become movements in the weather of your consciousness rather than definitions of your essential nature. And from this spacious awareness, you're free to engage fully with life, not from the constriction of fear but from the expansion of wholeness. As we bring our exploration to a close, I want to leave you with a simple but powerful truth: the version of you that you're afraid to become is already watching you, not as an ominous threat but as a guardian of your wholeness. When you turn to face this guardian with courage and compassion, what once appeared as a shadow to be avoided reveals itself as a guide to be integrated. The very aspect of yourself that you feared becoming becomes a catalyst for becoming who you truly are. This understanding isn't just philosophical, it's practical and transformative. It changes how you relate to your fears, how you make decisions, and how you create your life. It liberates energy that was once trapped in avoidance and makes it available for authentic expression and conscious creation. I invite you to begin this integration process today. Start with one of the practices we explored. The morning mirror practice, the journaling dialogue, the alternative timeline meditation, the value extraction exercise, or the integration ritual. Choose the one that resonates most deeply with you, and commit to exploring it for at least 7 days. Notice what shifts in your awareness and in your life. Remember, this journey isn't about eliminating parts of yourself, it's about embracing the fullness of who you are. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. The peace you seek doesn't come from absence of inner conflict but from presence with all aspects of yourself. The harmony you desire isn't static but dynamic, a dance with the ever-changing nature of your experience. If this exploration has resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your experience in the comments below. Which practice will you try first? What version of yourself have you been afraid of becoming? How has this perspective shifted your relationship with that feared self? And if you found value in this video, please share it with someone who might benefit from this understanding. Sometimes the right message at the right time can be the catalyst for profound transformation. Before we part, I want to remind you of something essential. The version of you that you fear becoming holds no power over your destiny unless you give it that power through avoidance. When you turn to face this aspect with presence and compassion, what was once a source of fear becomes a source of wisdom. You are not defined by what you fear becoming or by what you aspire to be. You are the awareness that holds all of these expressions, vast enough to embrace both your light and your shadow, your aspirations and your fears. In this awareness, you're free to create consciously, to love fully, and to live authentically, not from fear of what you might become, but from connection with who you truly are. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. Until next time, remember that the path to wholeness isn't about becoming someone new, it's about embracing all that you already are. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more content on consciousness, psychology, and authentic living. Click the notification bell to be informed when I release new videos every week. And if you're ready to dive deeper into this work, check out my online course, Shadow Integration, From Fear to Wholeness, linked in the description below. Until next time, walk in wholeness and peace.